Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast, a place for thinkers. Join us as we explore the depths of theology, philosophy, and the Christian intellectual life.
Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Roberts. Today we've got a special guest, Brett Craig from the Adwoke podcast. But before we get to him, I just want to remind you all that we did a giveaway this week of Strange Habit of Mind. It's already done. You missed out. Sorry about that. I'm not really actually sorry, but you should subscribe. Subscribe to our newsletter at solomonscorner.com/book club. If you get on there, we have giveaways for anybody on that list. So make sure you jump on there to get things like, giveaways like Andrew Kelly's book or some of these awesome pens that I make. So make sure you get on there. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a 5-star review, even if you don't like it. And don't forget, we also have a e-store coming up. So that's going to drop in 2023, but we might be able to get maybe a couple beta tests in before Christmas. So we'll see what happens there. My guest is Brett Craig. I've been listening to his podcast, the Adwoke podcast. You're not crazy. They are. It's awesome. You really need to check it out, especially if you're in the corporate world. I'm going to bring Brett on. He's going to tell us a little bit about his story. We're going to talk about all things DEI in the corporate world and anywhere else the conversation goes. So, Brett, thanks for coming on.
No problem. And don't beat up your name. I like your name. Solomon's Corner. That's
Yeah.
good. I was going to tell you that. It's a good name.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always stumble over my words whenever I start it off. So it's like
That's hard.
The first one. It's like Solomon's Corner. There we go. We're not speaking in tongues. It's just a hard name to say under pressure.
Yeah, a little bit about me. I came from the advertising world, worked with Fortune 500 companies like Taco Bell, Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, Call of Duty. I don't know if you did.
No way.
You said you program. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Call of Duty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did some crazy work for those guys in Activision. So I have about 22-year career in that. Kind of left that business about 2 years ago, kind of under a odd auspices. It was kind of a great career, and then suddenly it was over.
Yeah.
And then I had about a 6-month run with Daily Wire, helping them set up their brand team at Daily Wire.
Oh, no way.
So which was cool. So basically Daily Wire, obviously they've had all the success. But what they never really had was a brand team inside of the building, taking all these assets, all these celebrities and brands, and really branding them in a more elevated, sort of sophisticated way. And so I got a chance to work with them and set that brand team up, and that's still going strong now.
Now, what is a brand team for those not in the marketing world? Like, does that mean that you gave like Ben and Matt and everybody else like their own little crews, or like how does that work?
So basically, it's just putting together a creative team, really.
Okay.
So there's these beings called creatives in advertising. They're writers and art directors. They generally work for these big brands and get paid a lot of money to do that. Most of the time, I don't think conservative brands get a hold of these very talented people because they don't know how to. They often can't pay as well. And so that's what I put together was a team of creatives, calling it a brand team.
Okay.
For Daily Wire.
Gotcha. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So does that mean you got a bunch of signed swag? I'm just kidding.
Well, you know what? I probably could have got all that stuff.
Yeah.
But truthfully, what's so funny is when you're working in the Daily Wire, you run into a lot of the celebrities in the hall, like Michael Knowles or Matt Walsh. And there's always that thing, like, how much of a fanboy do you really want to be?
Right.
Like one pretty funny story was I ran into Matt one day and I was just like, Matt, I would love to know from you, like, I would love to know what it takes to be brave. And Matt, just if you look at Matt Walsh and just think about him, like it was like Matt Dillon in that 52, card pickup or whatever. And outside, he looked at me and I said, it'd be nice to talk about that. He goes, yeah, we should talk about that. And then he walked away. But it's just funny. So you get, Michael Knowles, and they're all so nice. But,
yeah.
Ben's so nice. But it is kind of funny when you see them go by and you see other celebrities like Jonathan Isaac or, forget the guy from the UFC, Dana, whatever. They're coming through there, and so it's kind of like ESPN Sports Center of conservatism.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like the command center of conservatism.
It is.
It's like All right, what's command saying? Okay, let's move out. All right, we got a what is a woman thing over here? All right, let's go, rally the
Totally.
troops. Yeah, that's
It
awesome.
is. It's like that. It's kind of crazy. One day there's a bald eagle in the place, and everybody's taking a picture next to a bald eagle. Then Jonathan Isaac walks in another day. I mean, people are coming and going all the time. Sometimes you don't even see him. There goes Jordan Peterson.
Wow,
it's pretty crazy.
That is really awesome. So now you were in LA, right? And then
I was,
you moved,
yeah.
right? So did you move with those
years.
For how many years? Did you say
50 years?
50?
Yeah. So in 50 years.
50. Whoa.
Yeah, and raised in LA. Never moved. I think I went to school for 2 years in Idaho, University of Idaho.
Yeah.
And then at 50, about 2020, I no longer worked in advertising, and suddenly I'm like, LA is expensive. I need to move. Yeah. And ended up in Tennessee. And it just so happens Daily Wire happens to be here.
Wow. That is providential. That is pretty cool.
It is crazy. I wanted to be there when I was in LA, and I had actually reached out to Jeremy Boring, and I had created this fake website, or this like WordPress site, talking about my desperation to work for them, and presented myself as like everything from a sketch writer to advertising, which is my real core competency. But put this whole thing together, and the thing that actually won them over and brought me in was my silly references at the bottom, which were from like a few like notable people like Dana Lash, who's a conservative kind of pundit, and they were very self-deprecating references to me, and they liked that. They were like, that was the one thing they thought was funny about the whole site. And they're like, yeah, maybe we'll bring you in here. You're funny.
It's so funny to me because like that. Like public persona stuff is so different than like the rest of the world. Like my wife did resume writing for a little bit, and it's like, you don't want to self-deprecate, kind of a thing. But if you're in like the ad world, or you're in this, they're looking at your tweets, they're looking at all this kind of stuff. Is he funny? Can he do this? It's like, it's totally different. It breaks all the rules. That's hilarious.
It's really true. It really is true.
So what inspired you then to start the Adwoke podcast, and what is it about? Because your mission's pretty important.
Because of what happened to me in advertising, you may not know, I was one of those canceled people. In the height of the George Floyd kind of hysteria, I was the chief creative officer of the biggest agency on the West Coast. And our company had put up the black square like every other company, probably foolishly. And then someone then took an email from like 5 years earlier and posted it underneath it. And it just caused like a mob situation. And that mobbing situation kind of, the email, I could have written it better. It was a casting email, 2 black talents. I was trying to describe which one I thought we needed for the job. And I probably could have written it better, but at any other time in America, it was a nothing burger. Particularly because I had never had even a single problem in HR in 22 years. Never had any issue with anybody.
Yeah.
But in that environment, it was like, it was just easier to lay me on the altar, as it were, than deal with it.
Yep.
So that's what happened. It was really hard because it was like, I had a great reputation in the agency, great reputation in the industry, no dead bodies. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that, like, of course, some people might, there's always people who don't enjoy working with you. That's going to happen to all of us.
Yep.
But in general, I had a great reputation. And so suddenly this email gets posted on an Instagram post, gets surfaced, and then, we're held by a huge holding company with 50,000 employees. And the first thing they're thinking is, we just got to get away from this guy. And so it was just a really unexpected moment in my life. I remember, sitting in my bed like 3 days after it happened and just sort of sinking into my bed and going, what just happened to me? Like, it was like being in a car wreck. And so it's one of those things where I don't know what God's doing, but he's got the plan. And so Adwoke, I think, comes out of that cancellation and just a drive to talk about these issues that I think are so polarizing inside of corporate America. And I just have a heart to talk about them.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was going to just ask, like, you brought up your faith and you're pretty open about your faith on your podcast.
Yeah.
How did that, well, there's 2 questions. I'll ask the second one after this, but how did your faith kind of help you get through that? Was there anything that, you would give advice as far as from what you've learned as far as pressing into that, if that happens to other people?
I think there's been a lot of lessons. I think one of them is, like, when I first got baptized, it seemed like everything was going great. I was just getting blessed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was sort of the opposite of what I was warned about. I'm like, people were like, if you come out for Christ, remember, you're going to become a target.
Yeah.
For 8 years, that was not true.
Mm.
And then when this happened, it was like, oh, this is what Jesus was talking about when he said, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head.
Yeah.
The world hated me, they're going to hate you.
Mm.
While the situation that happened to me might not have been expressly against my affiliation with Jesus Christ, I think it was connected.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting as you look at persecution, even in America, and it's nothing like it might be in the CCP in
Right.
China or in North Korea or in somewhere else. So we don't want to compare ourselves to that.
Yep.
Or in parts of Africa, let's say, or the Middle East. To the extent that there is persecution, it rarely announces itself as, oh, I don't like you because you're a Christian. It's coming into America a little bit.
Right.
Usually it's because you're a Christian nationalist, or you're a racist, you're anti-LGBTQ. It's something adjacent to Christianity, but ultimately the real reason is because you're a Christian. Mm-hmm. Because you have these convictions, what Jesus said is starting to occur for you.
Yeah.
If you hold to these principles, if you hold to biblical truth, it's going to put you in a collision with the world. And Jesus told us that was going to happen. But in America, because we've enjoyed this sort of residual Christian cultural vibe in America, right?
Yeah.
We've largely not had to experience that here. And suddenly in 2020, 2019, we're running headlong into the culture.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that happened for me growing up, I grew up around the shooting of Columbine, and there was a real shift that happened, because I don't know if you recall what happened there, but, I remember it like it was yesterday, because all of a sudden everybody had it on their minds, like, is this going to happen in my school? All these parents, were trying to, well, maybe I should, talk to Timmy about martyrdom, right? And so, because one of the students there was asked, do you believe in Jesus? And she said yes, and they killed her, And one of the challenging things is now every kid is like, well, that's happening here, because you had Voice of the Martyrs, you had DC Talk. I don't know if you grew up Christian or not, but I grew up Christian, and so I got all the good tropes that come with that. It's good for comedy though. But I can remember asking my dad in the truck on our way to school, like, hey, Dad, like, would you be strong enough to do that? And he was like, paused for a long time, and he said, I would hope I would be strong enough to do that, right? And so you have this polarization that happened, where it was like, so there's martyrdom, and then there's just living your Christian life, and it felt like everything in the middle kind of just went whoosh, like that. And so anytime a Christian got condemned or punished or whatever, I can remember people saying, well, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. And so there was this thing coming all the way up through. Do you think, like, do you see that as well? Like, that people kind of just see this as like, well, you just have to die for Jesus, and that's really what persecution is. But anything in between is kind of like, you're probably just being a jerk. Like, do you see that as well, or is that not your perspective or experience?
Yeah, no, I see it as a spectrum.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think the disciples, they all faced persecution on the way to martyrdom.
Yeah.
There is the point where Peter's hung upside down on a cross, and John's on Patmos. But on the way there, they're outcasts.
Yeah.
And that's what's promised to them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You're going to go town to town, take your sword with you because, you need to defend yourself. This isn't going to be easy. Paul, I come in fear and trembling, not because he's being welcomed, but because it's hard.
Yeah.
I think it's all persecution. And I think we're in that middle stage of persecution in America. And what we're discovering is that we're not even up for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing, what were you going to say?
Go ahead. Well, the church is just turning out to be so soft.
Oh yeah.
And Christians are turning out to be so soft. We've turned to jelly in America.
Yeah.
We don't even know what persecution is. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, people don't like us for our fundamental beliefs. Mm-hmm. What do I do with that? Yeah. Oh, I know what to do. I'll accommodate them.
Yep.
is kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I see your "Live Not by Lies" book right there in the back, and which is solid book. We did that for our book
so
club.
Good.
Yeah, and one of the books that it's based on is the Captive Mind, which I brought here just to show to you, because I don't know if you've read this or not, but
no,
a lot of it is about Rod Dreher was inspired. That's how we found out about it. It was in one of his footnotes. But in there, he talks about the fact that the way that this kind of vitriol and hatred comes in, like a lot of people, I feel like Christians will sometimes be like, well, you're just overreacting, you're an alarmist or whatever. And I know you've said on your podcast a couple times, like, hey, if we don't stop this DEI stuff, like it's going to get bad. Like we really need to push back on it. And I feel like a lot of times there's this view that that the church basically gets pushed underground, but people don't actually know what that means. They don't understand that in a lot of ways that's like there's two churches. There's the church that's favored by the state, and then there's the church that's not. And oftentimes this is, people talk about social credit and things like that, but that happened in Poland here first. And so this is about, the communist movements into Poland after Nazism fell. And one of the things he talks about in there is he's always juxtaposing the Marxist ideology with the Christian one. And one of the things he says is that, Christianity tries to focus on the individual and say you're forgiven, whereas the communists or the Marxists want to focus on historical sin and guilt, and then, expand those fissures. And so, you're kind of starting to see that, like, what you're saying with the apathetic, church and just kind of getting soft. It's like they're like, well, we're still here. I mean, nothing's changing. It's like, well, except for the fact that all these Christian schools have kingdom diversity programs, or one funny one. I don't know if you saw this, but Gordon Conwell, they had a statement of DEI. Did you see this at all?
No, I did not.
So they messed up the acronym, and they had it as diversity, inclusion, and equity. So the acronym was DIE.
It's DIE.
So they had it as a theology of die, which, if God's got a sense of humor, he's got a sense of humor for every stage. It's like
funny. At
the beginning of your faith and at the end of it. As you're walking out, he's going to get you with a joke. But anyway, so your podcast basically is really going after a lot of the not going after, I don't want to say it that way, but is engaging with the corporate DEI stuff. So the second question I had was, were you always aware of this? Because I know for me, I was kind of like, whatever, you guys do whatever, if you got pronouns, whatever, I'm just going to do my job. Was that your kind of idea? Or were you always did you always have a pulse on what was going on in your industry and corporate America at large?
The moment diversity, equity, inclusion entered the building and I saw it, I went, uh-oh, this is progressive leftism. Mm-hmm. This is politicized. It has a certain worldview, which is neo-Marxist. It's oppressor lens on the world. And the moment it came into advertising, I was like, this is scary, because I'm already seeing where this is going. So in my diversity, equity, inclusion course, the first thing my instructor did is put up a map of the Western Hemisphere. And he said, this is 14 something or other. And this is before racism entered America, or entered the Western Hemisphere. That's because Columbus. Yeah. The moment Columbus comes, racism enters. And I went, okay, this is what this is going to be. So, and then it went on from there. It was every Democrat was good. Every citing of every Republican I talked about on one of the podcasts was bad. And I went, oh, this is fully political. And it has a worldview. I didn't get that far that day with this man, but later in the deck, it was white privilege, white fragility. All of it was in there.
Yeah.
So, from the beginning, I was worried.
Yeah. So the way it happened for me was I was pretty passive. I was basically, I had just, left the nonprofit world, got my first developer job. I was like super pumped. And then that day, like we hired somebody in, and they had said that after like a short period of time, suddenly said that they wanted us to use certain pronouns and stuff. And all of a sudden it was like the whole culture shifted. So we didn't even have a training. There was nothing that happened. The George Floyd stuff kind of got things a little more heightened.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the casualness of the work environment went to walking on eggshells. Like, you didn't want to offend anybody. You didn't want to, you could kind of feel the tension, at least for me. Maybe some other people didn't feel that way, but I could tell, like, okay, as a conservative, I have to be careful what I say now, because I don't know where the Overton, as the Daily Wire guys like to say, the Overton window, which, I don't know where that is anymore, the range of accepted speech. And I think that's what happens too for a lot of people. It's like, you're at a small company, they don't have the money to bring in a DEI consultant. All of a sudden, it's just kind of like these little like nudges, and then all of a sudden your HR policy has totally changed, or somebody leaves, and then all of a sudden there's this, it's like they launch this diversity, equity, inclusion training program that's like 6 months long, and it's like, well, where did that come from? You guys had that waiting in the ranks,
And it's presented as it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
There is no opposition you can have. This is just the right thing to do. You just need to put pronouns on your name. And if you don't do it, you're not accommodating. You're not practicing hospitality or being welcoming. You're not inclusive.
Yeah. And so, like, what do you think are some, and all, before we go down that road, let me think about this for a second. Yeah. Let's go this way. What do you think employees can do? Because one of the things you encourage people to do is, stand strong, speak out. Like, what does that look like? And obviously there's depending on the situation, all that kind of stuff, but what can people do to kind of push back in a winsome way? I mean, if, obviously you can lose your job, as you know, right? I mean, so there's no guarantees if you speak up that you're going to be preserved or that your job's going to be intact. So you have to have a little bit of courage, not liquid courage. You don't want to be drinking on the job, but you do need a little bit of courage to go in there and, kind of speak your mind. What does that look like? Does that look like, in a meeting, like, hey, I have a different opinion? Or what, can you describe what it would look like for employees to kind of stand up against their DEI?
I think one thing would be citing the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which says you can't be discriminated against for your religious beliefs. So if you're a Christian, your identity is in Christ, and your beliefs are just as valuable. And if pronouns violate that identity, then you need to let HR know that this is entering into a legal situation.
Yeah.
I think that would definitely wave them off the plate.
Yeah.
That's one way. I mean, you could speak up in a meeting. I think that is hard, but you're going to be targeted.
Yeah.
So I think like there's that too. I found myself in that first DEI meeting. I did speak up. And I did find that 50 faces were looking at me. Mm-hmm. And I did feel after the meeting like, uh-oh, I'm kind of out of the closet. And so, but I also worry that if we won't speak up, if we will hear that we're being encouraged to practice racism, to practice discrimination, and we won't say anything as Christians, especially, then how would it ever get better?
Yeah, right. Well,
so I think it's speaking up, having the courage to speak up and cite the strong foundation that you stand on, which is, are you telling me that I should judge someone by their skin color? Because that's what I'm hearing. Mm-hmm. I'm hearing when you say white privilege that all white people X. Now, my understanding is that we can never say all white people X or all black people X or all Asians X or all women X. But I'm hearing you say that I need to put everybody in a particular category. And there's two things about that. One, there's a legal problem.
Yeah.
But also that sounds like blatant discrimination that you're asking me to practice. And I've got a moral problem with that.
Yeah.
I don't know where you say that or how. I think it takes wisdom, but I do think you're on good legal ground.
Yeah. Well, and the other side of this is having a community that can support you. Like once this started happening at my job, telling people at church and stuff, hey, I'm kind of nervous about what's going on. It's getting tenuous. All of a sudden, it was like you had people praying for you. You had, one of the things we did, because all of a sudden other people started coming and say, hey, that's happening in my job too. And we started a prayer breakfast for people at work, especially during the pandemic, because then the vaccine mandates started coming through. And then it was like people were, because some people were like, whatever, I can dodge this one because it's not hitting my department or whatever. And, then all of a sudden the mandates came down. Now everybody's kind of like feeling like there's something in their work that's going to take them out of the workplace. And so we started a prayer group once a month. You just have people over, have some breakfast, and read some Psalms and pray for each other. It wasn't anything fancy, but it really helped strengthen me and other people to get through that time, especially at the time when it was so uncertain where things were going. I mean, it's so easy to look back now and be like, woo, mandate's over. Great. It's like, yeah, but if it didn't end that way, like, it'd be very different right now. And you can talk to people whose businesses are still forcing it, and it's still stressful. But having
I was going to say, even on that note, you're getting to something, which is, it all felt spiritual. It feels like there's something that's forcing you to take positions, and there's a wrong and a right position, and there's no hiding.
Yeah.
Like, you have to announce your vaccine status.
Yeah.
You have to announce your allegiance to BLM. You must wear this thing called a mask on your face. And anything short of that, you've got to put your Ukraine flag up.
Yeah.
Got to do. There's all these litmus tests for
Yeah.
whether or not you're obedient to the culture, and they just keep changing, but they keep happening.
Yeah.
And they're not allowing you to play neutral ever.
Yeah.
And so I think your praying is super important, because you're identifying that this is happening on a spiritual level. Something is compelling our places of work, the culture, to demand a statement of allegiance to things. And it's asking you to put away your critical thinking. It's asking you to park your judgment and saying, there is a thing you've got to do, like a latest thing.
Yeah.
And you've got to do it. And if you don't do that latest thing, pronouns, there's another one. I'm going to force you to put this thing on your email signature. And it tells me where you stand. If you have some kind of moral issue with that, then I know where there's something up with you, and you're going to become targeted, and you know that.
Yeah.
And so it's like this weird shift. And that, to me, I only can explain that as a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That something is pushing us to out people who is going to be obedient to the culture and who isn't. And then that feels like it originates in somewhere spiritual.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't just feel like typical HR or just typical corporate life, where we're just showing up at work. And we never needed to understand people's political allegiances. And of course, they'll tell you it's not political, but it is political. It's absolutely, because if you look at the political outward statements that you have to make, they all align with one party.
Yeah.
They don't align with the other one.
Yeah.
And it's presented as if it's just the right thing to do. And if you won't, then you don't like democracy. You don't care about Black people. You don't care about LGBTQ people. It's always immediately the ist is going to come out, the phobe, or just you're suspicious.
Yeah.
In some level.
Well, and it's like this thing, right? It's like if you have something on you, right? You're saying something about, it's a cross for those who can't see. I just realized my wife changed the oh wow, it's that small, huh? Oh, you're a little Christian. Okay, whatever. You hide in your faith there, you coward. All right. But yeah, I mean, like the thing that Miłosz says that's really helpful, and we did a whole summary of the book. We went through each chapter and read it. It's not family friendly, I will tell you that right now. Yeah. It's a pretty dark book, but one of the things he says in there is that, Christianity is public enemy number one. And he talks about Christians who think that they can live in both worlds, that they think that they can live in this, because it's not like communism just kind of came in and it was like, boom, here it is. It was a slow, steady kind of setting up boundaries around like this, and then slowly moving in on what you could do. And one of the things he talks about is how the Christians believed that they could serve essentially two masters. And he says what ends up happening is that they end up denying Christ and end up making their God the history of progress. So God becomes history, and they start to worship history and studying history and all this kind of stuff. And all the ills and all the problems of history have to be rectified. And that ends up becoming what they worship. And this kind of segues into the Christian world that's adopting some of this stuff. It's really funny because there was a university out there that is very, very fundamentalist, young earth creationist. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you want to believe 6 days, fine. I don't have a problem with that. what's interesting though is that they harp on all this Darwinian evolution, and they end up having a Marxist view of history, and they've got professors talking about white privilege and the history of slavery and how the white people got an advantage and all this kind of stuff, which is as you said, I think it was on your podcast, that it's the great sin of America. It's a real sin that we had,
Real history,
and it had real effects. And that's one of the things people don't realize is that Marxism, has a hint of truth in it that they try
Absolutely.
to just really get you to focus on. But you've got what they don't realize is that they're like, no Darwinism, not in our biology departments, but they let Darwinism into their history departments and the Marxism into their history departments, which is essentially at the bottom is materialism, which is ironic because, there you can't be a professor if you teach evolution, here. But if you want to teach history as evolution, that's fine with us, And so you've got these Christians. I think for them, they really need to listen to your podcast, especially because there are Christian organizations out there that are starting to flirt with this stuff, and they're having these DEI consulting sessions. And it is amazing to me to see how much people try to justify it from the Christian perspective of, well, we're just trying to love our neighbors, we're just trying to do this, we're just trying to do that. And it's like, well, but it's a false, if that's what you're going to do, if you're going to, try and wash it with the gospel, well, it's a false gospel, if that's what you want to call it. But there was another thing I wanted to touch base with you about before we wrap up here, is you mentioned like brand and marketing. That's kind of like your core competency, as you say. And one of the things that's interesting about your podcast is you're actually analyzing some of this stuff from a marketing perspective, which I thought was really cool. Can you go into like the DEI brand, how it got successful, like from like, put on your like marketing expert hat and like kind of like analyze it from that, and like how did we get here? What strategies did they implement, and what can we learn from them?
I think one of the things they've masterfully branded it: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Although none of those names, I think, actually none of those words play out that way. They're the opposite, frankly.
Yeah.
They've put you in a position where to be against it is to be against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that it's masterful branding. It's all neo-Marxism is masterful branding. Mm-hmm. So I think the branding has really put you behind the eight ball.
And real quick, just a follow-up question. When you say branding, like what do you mean by branding as a marketing expert? Because we hear brands and we just think, Nike, we think cool logo. Like, what do you mean by brand?
The packaging, the labeling, the name of the shoe, the name of the soft drink. We don't think about these things much, but the name is important. So they don't come in and say, this is going to be called exclusion, conformity. They come in and call it diversity, equity, and inclusion. And therefore, if you're against it in any way, you're against those things. Yeah. Which I think is really hard for people because it's really sophisticated sophistry. Mm-hmm. It's not inclusion, it's exclusion. We are going to exclude people with a new idea. Yeah. And if you don't get on board, you're going to be excluded. And we're not interested in diversity of thought. We are interested in conformity, but we've called it diversity. So you're in this position of like, well, this feels like conformity, but it's called diversity. And it's like, well, no, it's diversity of races and skin color, but not diversity of thought. So I think the branding is masterful. I think that it's the same thing like social justice. You're against social justice? Mm-hmm. Like, how could you be against social justice? No. I'm for justice. Yeah. I'm against your version of justice, which is going to punish people today for the sins of people from the past. That is what you're suggesting we do. Yeah. You're saying I'm going to put a white male or a white woman at the back of the line because of what has happened to Hispanics or Asians or blacks in the past. So it's branding. It's good branding.
So then like they got the brand. How do they start getting into these corporations? Like, cause it feels like you mentioned a training called Race to Dinner. Is that what it's called? I can't remember the name of the lady, which is, again, great branding, you gotta like give them a win. It's like good play on words there. We're racing and we're racist,
racing to dinner.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, not that kind of race.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
kind that's going to make you so uncomfortable you're going to be miserable for the next 3 hours being told you're evil.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the psalm that says bread and water is better with friends than a feast with enemies, you know?
Right.
But so they how long have these programs been going on? Because I know that, you know, you listen to commentators and stuff, CRT, even some of the people who are pro DEI will say, look, you know, CRT started at Harvard University and it's a sophisticated legal theory, blah, 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 or whatever it is, whatever to give it the intellectual street cred, right, that they need. So what is it that they did to get from the university and into the corporate world? Because, you know, I grew up with parents who were like, once you get into the real world, you're going to find out, you know, that stupid stuff just ain't gonna make money, Daniel. Right? Like, so
Yeah.
So
right.
how did they get into the corporate world and start these trainings?
I think this thing called ESG, environmental social governance,
Okay.
which we're starting to hear about.
Yep.
It's happening way up on the holding company level, on the BlackRock, level. You're not going to get your investment. You're not going to get funded unless you sort of observe and are rated by these metrics and meet these metrics. So you're not going to get funded. So I think that's where it's coming from. So in the case of my agency, it was held by a holding company, and the people at the very top, they were going off to the World Economic Forum and to Davos, and they're sitting at a table with the biggest financial, and it's everybody, hey, we're all going to take on this environmental social governance, and DEI is a big part of that. And if you don't, well, guess what? We're not going to give you the money to acquire that ad agency in Thailand.
Wow.
So you're going to be, scored by this. And so it's a big problem. DEI is coming from higher.
Yeah. And
it's not just coming, because otherwise it's impossible to understand how it all came in all at once, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah.
One piece of that was the George Floyd thing. I think it put an accelerant on it.
Yep.
But another piece of it was coming down on Fortune 500 companies. They're all being presented this. Mm-hmm. And all their CEOs and C-suite are saying, we've got to do this. This thing's bigger than me. We've got the biggest financial institution saying we're not going to be scored in such a way that we can even get a loan.
Wow.
Unless we look a certain way. And the biggest thing DEI is going to do, which sounds like a good thing again, is just look at representation and say, you're not perfectly representative. And even though that's going to violate your law in America, we're going to tell you to start discriminating so that you are perfectly equitably representative.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you touch on a good point is about the loans, because a lot of people don't think of it that way. They just think, well, because, I have the Great Reset by Klaus Schwab over here. That
sure,
book.
I've got it too.
That was a conspiracy theory. And then it was like, hey, it's on Amazon. And
wait, it's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, the Great Reset, huh? You conspiracy theorists? Well, right. This guy right here named Klaus Schwab, who has a very weird accent, could be in a movie,
yes.
But they
Great Reset.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good accent right there.
Now is the time. We are the ones that will build the future.
Yeah. The other one, I have it here, I think, on the wall. I don't have it, but have you know who Yuval Noah Harari is?
Oh my gosh, that guy's frightening.
Oh yeah, we did a whole series on comparing his Homo Deus. Have you read that book?
Mm-mm.
Oh man, the Homo Deus is man god in Latin, and in that book, he explicitly goes out of his way to say we will become gods. And like, I mean, it is so crazy. And C.S. Lewis predicted this. Hannah Arendt, who is a more, in the intellectual circles, she's a big name in the philosophy world. Hard books to read, by the way.
Yeah,
wasn't one of my favorite. But the point is, on the ESG stuff, like the loan aspect is what I don't think people talk about. I mean, this is
right.
Something that I just realized as you're saying it is, yeah, that score can actually inhibit you from getting loans, because a lot of people, like we're a small business, right? Like we're basically kind of just like making ends meet, trying to scrap this, grab this, we're not thinking like, oh, you know what I could really use right now? I could use like a $3 million loan, like I'm not going that route. But that is how the corporate world works. It's like, I've got this great idea. I've got this great drug. I've got this great whatever.
Funding.
Yeah. I need some money, because there's no way I can just do this with the savings I got from the last 20 years.
Right.
Right. And that's how business works. And so if that score keeps you from getting that, imagine what would happen if maybe, put our tinfoil hat on for a second, but imagine if you had an ESG score for your home loan.
And imagine if you have an ESG score for everyone.
Yeah.
And that is what social credit, I don't even think it's even a conspiracy. It's exactly what they plan on doing. It's exactly where this is going. ESG and DEI is making us accustomed to the idea that some capricious set of rules is going to govern your business.
Yep.
You're going to have to take things into consideration that have nothing to do with your business. They're not going to advance your business. And we're grooming you mentally to accept that. And then eventually we're going to make you accept it in your own family, in your own life, in your own bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That there's some greater mission, social justice, environmentalism, that is going to require that you behave a certain way, spend your money a certain way, hire a certain way. And if you don't do it, you ain't going to be part of the system.
Yeah.
I think that is what is happening. That is what is being happening.
And people are looking for, they look for things like, it's like they want the words to be exactly the same. So it's like, well, if there was an atrocity like Gulag, right? What are you talking about? I don't see anything called Gulag out here. Well, what about those COVID-19 camps? Well, I mean, they're not labor camps. Well, yeah, I mean, they're not labor camps, but I mean, it's a camp. They called it a camp. I mean, that's
you can always expand its use. If today it's for COVID, but tomorrow it's because you're not doing the right environmental things that we told you to do.
Yeah. And now, I don't know if you've seen this, but you know how they had all those warnings about COVID-19 stuff, like this could be COVID-19 misinformation to get the most up to date, blah, 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 blah. Click on this link.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Somebody told me the other day, or maybe I heard it on one of the Daily Wire podcasts, that they were watching a podcast on abortion, and there was a disclaimer that said, for the facts on abortion, click here, kind of a thing. And but I think that people are always looking for the identical repetition of the atrocities of the past. And if they don't manifest exactly that way, then why are you freaking out? It's like, well, first of all, I could show you that Stalin wanted a lot of the things we have right now, but he wasn't able to get them because the technology wasn't there. But obviously, we see the past and bad actors see the past. So why would they, I don't think if there is a real bad, evil person, he's probably pretty smart. He's probably not going to be like, you know what? I think those swastikas worked out pretty well. Maybe we should bring those back.
Good
it's
branding.
Like, yeah. It's like, no, we got to do something else. And this is what I've told people about the pronouns thing. It's not that they actually care about the transgender community. This thing is like one of the most powerful political weapons ever created. It's like, oh, you're not using the pronoun? You must be conservative. See you later. And if not, then who cares? Let's take the risk and let's bring somebody else in that's more along the lines of our ideology. There was one.
Well, I was going to say the natural progression of history to me, or man, the heart of man, is towards totalitarianism and authoritarianism. That is where it always goes.
Yeah.
The anomaly in history that I can think of is America. It's because you have these Christian founders and these deists who take biblical principles, understanding the heart of man, and understand that where this always leads, if it isn't fully put in check, is that it will be top-down authoritarian control is the destination of every government that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a swastika or a sickle. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's eventually, even what we're seeing today, eventually we end up in top-down authoritarian control where you're not allowed to think, you're not allowed to dissent, and that's where we're heading.
Yeah.
Today, it's just a new version of it. It doesn't look exactly like Nebuchadnezzar's reign in Babylon, nor does it look exactly like Pharaoh's reign in Egypt, nor does it look exactly like Hitler's reign in Nazi Germany. Yeah. But it's the same exact thing, which is there's going to be a litmus test for participation. And you either pass this, just, usually sort of, like you said, random set of rules. Pronouns aren't important to us, really. We don't really care about transgendered people. We don't care about them. If we did, we wouldn't let 12-year-olds mutilate themselves. We don't care about that, actually. What we care about is it's an outward litmus test, which you will need to pass.
Yeah.
And one day it's whether you put, like we said, the mask on. The next day it's It's whether you're disseminating misinformation for COVID, but it just doesn't matter. It's just that we make the rules. The question is whether you'll follow them. If you will not follow them, then we're going to debank you, deplatform you, demonetize you. And it's happening all over the place right now.
Yeah. And the thing also is, like, people use China as a social credit example. They'll be like, the Chinese social credit system. Well, there's two things too, is that social credit has always existed. It's just that, because, like, for example, if you know somebody, you've got good social credit with them. It's like, this is the basis of networking, right? Hey, if I go, hey, Brett, I really want to be a developer on Call of Duty, right? And then you're like, oh yeah, I know some people, I mean, I can't get you a job there, but you should talk to this guy, right? And I say, hey, Brett sent me over here. It's like, which, by the way, I don't want to work for Call of Duty, just full disclosure. But at the end of the day, that is what social credit is. The problem is that what technology has done is it's been able to take these things that were traditionally qualitative, they were kind of murky, right? It was like you kind of had to trust your gut, and it was able to quantify it. And that's what's happening, is that this phenomenon that's always been there was always there, and we had things that were protection, like privacy. Like, let's say you burn a bridge with somebody, right? Like maybe well, in this example, it's like, okay, Daniel was a jerk to somebody. Well, I could change, but that's not going to follow me all the way through my digital history, right? It's like now, even now, it's like, well, people from my hometown are sending me stuff of like, hey, did you see the race that's happening? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, because I ran track and cross country. Sorry, you don't know that aspect about me. So, but at that point, people can follow you for the rest of your life. And, whereas before it was like, if a friend passed away and you were out of town, you might live the rest of your life and never know. Right. And so, like, there was this kind of built-in insulation against the social credit system. You could move to another town, you could go do this. But now LinkedIn, they've got your whole job history right there. It's like, oh, you were working for that group? Why'd they let you go? Kind of
Wire.
Yeah, exactly. And so now what's happened is that people will be like, again, in America, they want to throw out, whether it's, racist, white privilege, or conspiracy theorists. That's another one that's just become like a, basically let's shut down thinking and let's just become drones kind of response. Right. It's like, you're just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, well, no, like you can look at it. I mean, there is a real thing called social credit, and it is what civilizations run on. To your other point, the idea of top-down government is where people go. People don't think of governments as organisms. They don't really think of them that way. But that's a good analogy, because at the end of the day, a government wants to self-preserve. Why? Because it's made up of people who want to self-preserve. Yep. And so, like, it has a lot of the same traits. Well, what happens, when a kid or even like at school or in a family is getting out of line and disrupting the whole family or the whole school, right? It's like, well, we're going to take that guy, we're going to set him aside, and we're going to say, you need to get your act together so you can be back into the social credit of the society. When people stop taking personal responsibility, that's like a virus in the organism. It's like the government suddenly sees this and says, well, I've got to do something, because we can't have riots. We can't have this stuff going on. We can't have people just saying whatever they want, because they're making everybody mad and we got to survive. And so then they decide that they're going to just slowly shut it down. And that's why I think what you're doing is so important with the corporate world, because I think that's something that people have missed. I don't think that people understand that is a really important, I guess you could call it, mission field, but I don't like to use Christianese, but I can't think of anything better at this point. But I do think that is a really important strategic point, because it is a place where you can still have a lot of freedom of speech. You might have a coworker who says something and you're like, well, hey, why don't we talk about that? And you won't have any repercussions necessarily in that conversation. It's still risky, but.
Well, to your point, that's why I think diversity, equity, inclusion, it's really just critical race theory. It's critical gender theory, critical whiteness theory, all rolled into diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think the reason those neo-Marxist philosophies had to get into corporate America is because it is such a pillar. Mm-hmm. How are you going to change America fundamentally if you can't touch this sector called corporate America? It has all the money. It has outsized influence. These brands are as famous as any celebrity, like Nike.
Yeah.
And Apple. So if you don't take it, if you don't make corporate America heel to this ideology that is really from the government, it's really, there's no way to transform America.
Yeah.
There's no way to turn it into socialism, which I think is what they want, communism, a form of it.
Yeah.
So that's what DEI is. It's just like it has to go into the church.
Yep.
It has to get inside these organisms and change them.
Yeah. Yep.
From the inside out. I think, I've actually, one of the things that I've thought about, and other people have said this, but like you'll hear a lot of people say it's a mind virus.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's called diversity, equity, inclusion, or critical race theory, which is the other famous one.
Yep.
Because DEI is critical race theory and critical gender theory. It's all of it rolled into one. It's all the neo-Marxist critical theories rolled into one. And, but it is COVID was so interesting because I always just see that little symbol when I think of DEI.
Yeah.
It's a virus. And when it comes in, it takes over the host.
Yeah.
And then it replicates itself. Coca-Cola ceases to be Coca-Cola, and it's a DEI purveyor at that point, replicator.
Yeah.
And creator of DEI.
Yeah.
And that's what it almost exists to do at that point.
Yeah. I'll have to send you a quote because this was written in like 1951. And in there, he talks about this spider or this bug that looks for caterpillars, and its venom paralyzes it. And then it lays.
I've seen that.
Yeah. Lays its eggs in there. And he says, this is what happens with what he calls dialectical materialism, but it's actually Marxism. It's this is the ideology. And he says, what happens is this is what happens when these ideas get into a society is the host is still there. So you're just kind of numb to everything. And then eventually, the eggs that were laid or whatever, is kind of a gross analogy, I guess. You don't realize how gross things are until you're on a microphone talking about it. It's like, oh man, Brett, you made me think of this really gross thing. Oh yeah, there's other people who are going to be listening to this. I hope you're not eating lunch right now. It's like somebody's going to leave a comment. I just threw up. But yeah, it's that idea, that is what it is. And he even has, the mass formation psychosis thing. In the opening,
it's amazing.
Yeah, in the opening chapter, he says, "I felt like I was participating in a massive psychological experiment." Like that's
feels, cult-like, because it's a takeover ideology.
Yep.
Like you said, DEI will come into a company, and then it will make the company subservient to it.
Yep.
DEI or critical race theory will enter the church, wokeness, and you find when the pastors talk, Scripture is subservient to wokeness.
Yeah. Yep.
It takes the preeminent spot. It doesn't, it's not like it's even a marriage. It is for a while, but then eventually it's like, no. Actually, the biblical truth is going to have to become subservient to neo-Marxism. That worldview is dominant, and that is the thing that I'm really preaching now.
Yeah.
And then to the degree that I can find a way to roll Jesus into that and the New Testament and the gospel into that, it just becomes a way to further the neo-Marxist worldview.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because for the Christians out there, we are in a spiritual battle, whether it's DEI today or communism in the future. Like you're in a spiritual war. And that means that there are opportunities when you engage in these battle of ideas to bring forth the idea that actually brings freedom, which is the gospel. Because that's really why we engage in all this stuff anyway, is because we talk about the intellectual life and we say, Christians or non-Christians, if you want to be a better thinker, come listen to our podcast. We're going to try and help you be that. But disclaimer, you're a better thinker if you incorporate Christianity into that, like whether it's the history or whether it's the philosophers or whatever, or aiming at honoring God with your intellectual life. You're just going to be a better thinker. That's my kind of caveat there. But
to your point too, just to add to that, laying the doctrine down next to the biblical doctrine, social justice is saying that we're going to bring a utopia or a paradise to earth, that man is within his reach, like Marxism says, to right the wrongs. And yet the Bible never, ever, ever says that. Yeah. It actually says that all of nature and all of creation is groaning for the Savior to come back and sit. He's on the throne, but sit on the throne on earth.
Yeah.
And that the moment that he resumes that spot on earth and it falls out of Satan's lap, for the time being, it's in his hands.
Yeah.
Then order and justice will be restored. Yet you as a pastor are suddenly talking about, you're talking like Patrice Cullors from BLM.
Yeah.
She's a Marxist. She says she is.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
Marxist, that's what Marx believed. He thought he was
Yeah.
going to bring the garden back down to earth and man would do it.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that we would do that is to remove God and
Mhm.
understand our full potential and assume our rightful place. That is satanic. That
Yeah.
is a satanic idea.
We
The only way we're getting to justice, social justice, is for Christ
Yep.
to fully resume his spot and,
Yeah.
and to take his place in our lives personally, and then eventually the culture's life, so that we can have social justice. But
Yeah.
we don't get it here through
Right.
BLM, and we're not going to get it through government, or until it's Christ's government that
Yeah.
rules.
Well, and I think the thing that people have forgotten is, because I hear a lot of different groups, especially Christians who are, fighting things or whatever. There's this kind of implicit like prosperity gospel,
Yes.
kind of a thing. And in one of your podcasts, you said, I understand, this might be a David versus Goliath thing, and if I fall, I fall, whatever. I can't remember. I don't think you said it quite as
Something like that. Yeah. Jeremiah.
as brutish as I did just there. But what kind of intellectual podcast is this? But the thing that I have seen a lot is, because we study a lot in our book club and stuff of communism. We read the primary sources like Solzhenitsyn, Gulag Archipelago, and what people forget sometimes is that, especially with end times theology stuff, and I don't want to get too far down the road on that, but there's so many people who look at things going on and they're like, this is it. Maybe Jesus is coming back. And it's like, well, go read Gulag over here and see how bad it can get and Jesus not come back. Because, that's important.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you have to have a theology of defeat that leads to victory, because that's what we're promised. It's that, if everything can happen, the dark night of the soul could happen and complete itself just like it did on Jesus. And yet, because of his conquering of death, right? We know that through death, we come to actually meet him in heaven. Like, that's the thing. It's like, no, it's not that like God's necessarily going to slay the giant, so to speak. It's that if the giant slays you, he still loses, and like people don't have that's what we're holding on to. It's that I have the courage to go out here because it could get really bad. It could get really dark. It could get worse than either of us you or I have even comprehended. But it's like Solzhenitsyn says in Gulag Archipelago. I've referenced this so many times on the podcast, so I know exactly where it is. It's on page 132. But, it's what do you do to survive is what he asks. And he says, you have to accept that you're already dead. And that, you might be dead a little bit early, for sure. But it's better to die in truth than to live in a lie. And that is a real hard thing to take.
And I love what you just said. And I think Solzhenitsyn was a Christian, was he not?
Yeah, he was Russian Orthodox.
I think so. But then what does Jesus say?
Yeah.
You're going to have to die to yourself.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, it's all coming. It's like, this is everything he told us.
Yeah.
Why didn't we believe him? Because America gave us this illusion that we could have both. We could serve mammon. We could be a part of this capitalistic free market system, and we could have some Christ.
Yeah.
And we were able to balance that. But Jesus actually said, you're going to have to struggle to enter the kingdom. You're going to have to take the narrow path while there'll be this wide path of destruction. And on the narrow path, you're going to have to die to yourself daily. You're going to have to take up your cross.
Yeah.
And when you think about take up your cross, and then I put that visual in my mind. And I go, Jesus died to himself. He did. I only say what the Father tells me to say. I only do what the Father tells me to do.
Yep.
This is not even about me. This is about, I just do what he says. Every day I wake up, I order my affairs according to what the Father wants. I say what he tells me to say. And when he tells me to carry a cross on my back after I've been ripped to shreds by a whip and got a crown on my head with nothing but death in front of me, I pick the cross up and I go to the spot that I'm going to do, because that's the spot on the field he's commanded. And that is our model. And it's like, so Solzhenitsyn says that's beautiful. And Jesus said that.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to have to die to yourself. Do you get that? Like, you don't play, your part is to play a role in my story, not vice versa. I don't get to play in your story. And it's the biggest and the best story and the most amazing story. And when you die to yourself and you get to play a part in the ultimate story, that is going to be the most exciting most adventure, the biggest adventure you're ever going to go on. And yes, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Yes, it's scary when people come against you. But like you said, you wake up in the night and what you have is this clean conscience that if I were thrown in prison, I don't want that. I don't want what happened to Paul. I don't want to be beaten with rods or shipwrecked.
Oh, really?
No, exactly. It's like, but I see why Paul could sing. I see why James could say, count it all joy when you experience trials. I'm starting to see, because in that moment, there's this kinship with Christ that you actually start to understand him better, what he went through, what it really is like to have the world hate you, to be a joke to Pilate, king of the Jews put over your head, to be abandoned by your own people, to have your very own disciples, including your best friend Peter, or one of your best friends, I'll die for you, and then deny you in front of you with cursing.
Yeah.
As he's looking at you, to a little girl. It wasn't like it was a Roman soldier. It was to a little girl. And then die on the cross naked with this embarrassing sign over your head, a fake crown, Roman soldiers gambling for your robes, and only your mom and John ever managed to get there. What a betrayal. What an abandonment. No wonder at that point he looks up and all he can say is, why have you forsaken me? Because that has to be the only thing you could imagine is happening at that point. Because however Jesus thought this was going to play out, and we say, well, he's God, he knows everything. Well, he limited himself. So we don't know exactly how that worked, but there's evidence to me that God did not think it equality with God was a thing to grasp. That's what the Bible says. That's what Paul says, I think. I'm not sure that Jesus in every moment knew exactly what was going to happen next. He might have, but I also think that sometimes the Father would show him things. I'm going to let you see into that person's mind. I'm going to let you have greater understanding. Why is he crying at Lazarus's death? I've always said this, if he knew that Lazarus was going to be raised 2 seconds later. It seems to me he didn't know. So when he's sitting there on the cross, I don't know that Jesus understands that it was supposed to play out exactly like this. I mean, I'm in the garden. I was only asking just a little while ago, can this cup pass for me? I don't think he's asking for nothing. I think he thinks the Father might have some plan. This is like, if in the air, then you're going to find a ram in the thorns over here. And no. So then if no is the answer, I'm going to pick my cross up and I'm going to walk to the top of the hill and I'm going to die in front of my mom and John. And gosh, I mean, that sounds horrible, but it also, on the other hand, is like the greatest glory laid on the other side of that. And it's an amazing, his story is the most powerful story in the world. And then we get to be a part of that. And to be a part of that, Jesus says, you're going to suffer with me. And in that suffering is going to be this sweet kinship and communion. I've felt that. So I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it is still kind of a scary thing to be told. No wonder he said count the cost, but you don't really know what he means, I don't think, when you say that, when he says that.
Yeah, there was a story told at an event I was at, and do you know who Patrick Lencioni is? Do you know who that is?
I don't know if I do. No, don't know.
He's just a CEO executive guy. And he was giving a talk, and he said that there was this Catholic guy in China who was having communion at his house in the underground church, and the authorities kind of like broke him up and tried to like find the priest, because in Catholic tradition, you have to have a priest to do communion, and they that's more for the I know you know that, Brett, just for the listeners.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
But he ends up getting the host of the event at his house event, this underground church service, gets captured and is tortured for several weeks to give up the name of the priest, because if they can get the priest, then they can't have the service, is kind of the logic there. And he ends up getting exiled, or gets a visa miraculously. If you read a lot about communists, you kind of realize what they do with people who can't be broken. They send them to other places to get them away from influencing the rest of society. But I don't know if that's the case with this. Anyway, the point is he comes over to the United States, and he's got a visa, and he can start a business. And first thing he realizes, he can go to mass every single day here for free, like in freedom. Nobody's going to stop him. Nothing crazy. He doesn't have to be in the shadows. And then he realizes, like, oh man, but this is really cutting into my bottom line, and I think I'll just go once a week. And then he realizes, like, if he keeps his business open on Sundays, he can really make a little bit more money. And eventually he stops going and doing mass, which, I'm not Catholic, so this isn't like a plug for Catholicism or anything, but it's just to show that, Catholics, generally speaking, in the spectrum of Christianity are tend to be those who we consider legalistic or, hardcore religious people and stuff. And this guy really is, authentic in his faith. And he comes to America, tastes the riches of America, and he decides to, stop going. And we look at that and we're like, how many times we hear that this American prosperity really kind of numbs us to what we should and should not do. And I don't think it really captures it just by saying that until you realize, like, there's this guy totally dedicated to Christ, suffers and does not break. But what breaks him is the American prosperity. I mean, that's pretty powerful to show you how powerful this stuff is. And if you're not vigilant on it, you can see why people are sitting there like, you know what? Yeah, I'll just throw the pronouns in there. I just bought a truck last week anyway. So, like, that's what it is. It's that mind virus that you said. Before we jump off here, because we're coming up on time, what is something encouraging if you got 30 seconds or whatever to tell somebody in a woke environment? What would you tell them if they were sitting here in the privacy of a podcast?
I think you have the truth on your side. I think you have the law on your side, even though it may not feel like that. I do think these companies could be sued. I think that strength in numbers is something that you might be able to get. It's dangerous to try to reach out to other people, but if you could go to your HR with 10 or 15 people or 20 people, you can make a dent in that. But I think you have the truth. And I think you're in the right. The diversity, equity, and inclusion is the ultimate gaslight. Everything from the title of it, the way that it's branded, like we talked about, to the fact that all the C-suite is going along with it, to the fact that it's coming down on high, it makes it feel inevitable. But I do think if there's any tangible hope I could offer somebody, we do still live in the United States. There still is the 1964 Civil Rights Act, while it's not being deployed. And it seems like there's this eerie silence. There are cases in front of the Supreme Court right now about admissions in college, where they're looking at diversity quotas, and they're saying, I think they're going to get struck down possibly. I don't know exactly how that's going, but you have the law, and I think you have the truth. I mean, at the end of the day, we know it's wrong to judge people by their skin color. We know it's wrong to look at someone's gender and say that, you know what, you're a patriarchal oppressor. We can't do that. We know we must take people as individuals, right? It doesn't mean that we don't believe there's racism. Of course there's racism. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to be fair. Of course we want to be fair, but fairness actually demands that we take each person as an individual and base our judgments on them to the extent that we can on their character. Again, it's not that we don't see color, because I think some people, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. Well, you do see color. Yeah. Of course you see color. Right. And that's one of the things that the sort of DEI folks get us on, or get people on. No, you see color, but you should strive to go beyond color. Yeah. That's the American idea. We don't stop at color. We don't stop at gender. And we don't stop at any of this stuff, because like a book, we want to know what's on the inside. And so I think you stand in the truth. So knowing that, don't be afraid to speak up. That would be probably my advice.
All right, Brett. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was a lot of fun. I had a blast. If you want to come back, I'll totally take you back. But where can people find you on Substack and on Apple Podcasts? Are you on more platforms than that, or is that where it is for now?
Yeah, I actually semi-prepared this stuff, because last time somebody asked me on a podcast, I was like, I don't remember. It was a little embarrassing. Yeah. So brettcraig.substack.com. It's not very inventive. It's just, that's Adwoke, but it's at brettcraig.substack.com. The Adwoke podcast is on iTunes and Spotify. You can follow me on Twitter at BAC37. Don't know why it's that. It's just because I signed up a long time ago in 2008, and I knew that. That's what it is. So any of those places, yeah. So appreciate your follow. It's all free. Like we were talking about, I'm doing this because I feel that diversity, equity, inclusion is one of the biggest threats to the entire system. Mm-hmm. And it's just fait accompli already. We already are saying it just is. Yep. We've already swapped them as our national values. And so my goal is to begin to get that conversation going. I know I'm just one little tiny person that happened to critical race theory, which now critical race theory has got bad branding around it.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want that title. DEI does not want to hear CRT because I've even seen DEI gurus and leaders say we don't want that CRT halo on us because it is that. But we've got to get that bad feeling around it, like other issues in America, to the feeling, so that people start to go, you know what? There's starting to be some it's getting a little smelly and something's in the soup on DEI, and it opens up the aperture for a conversation. So that's my mission, to do that.
Well, Brett, I really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to say, don't forget, everybody, you're not crazy. They are. There you go. Is that okay? Is that allowed? I don't know what the marketing rules are.
That's good branding. I need to get that in my, that might be the voiceover we need right
there. There you go. There you go. Yeah, I can do that. There you go. This summer. I'm just kidding.
This summer, you're not crazy. They are.
All right. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And remember, keep thinking.